When Nintendo producer Gunpei Yokoi was asked to make a game for the company's upcoming disk system accessory for their Famicom console, he decided he would make something darker and more mature than their typical fare. The result was Metroid in 1986, a startlingly innovative game that combined a number of already existing features with a few brand new ones. Its emphasis on non-linear exploration, power-ups, and intense combat was revelatory. Combined with its daring female protagonist, unveiled in one of gaming's most famous twists, the game became a legend among those who played it, who, sadly, weren't very many. The disk system was a poor seller, and Metroid never had a chance. However, the game found better success on the Famicom's Western cousin, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Stronger sales in America and Europe were just enough for the franchise to escape the death penalty. Yokoi and his R&D1 team then went on to create the Game Boy, a handheld system that was a commercial success beyond their wildest expectations. So when R&D1 at last returned to the Tale of Samus, they'd be doing it on the system they just invented. But little did anybody know that while they did, Metroid's original director would secretly begin work on a different Metroid game, and one of the finest 2D experiences of all time. (1991's Metroid 2: Return of Samus came a full 5 years after the original, and the series had changed in the meantime. For one thing, being on the Game Boy meant that the first game's vibrant colors had to go away. For another, Metroid 2 was a more linear game, with fewer different areas to explore. Many critics faulted the game for what overall felt like a watered-down version of the cult classic. It did have its strengths, however. The redesigned look of Samus's armor became the standard, and every Metroid game since has referenced its style. And once again, the otherwise bare-bones story ended with a memorable twist. Samus had landed on the evil Metroid's home planet, S03E23, named after a Yamaha bike engine that one of the programmers liked, in order to rid the galaxy of their menace for good. At the end of the game, Samus destroys the Metroid Queen, and with her, the Metroid threat. But on the way back to her ship, Samus encounters an egg that hatches a brand new Metroid. But in a sudden act of mercy, Samus spares this last creature and takes it home with her. It was a definite surprise and a rather uplifting note in a game that is otherwise about the genocide of an entire species. Sometimes violence isn't the only answer, kids. But there was one thing Metroid 2 didn't have, and that was the first game's director, Yoshio Sakamoto. Why did he leave Metroid? As a matter of fact, he didn't. Instead, he decided to skip the Game Boy title and quietly start designing a game for the company's brand new console, the Super Nintendo. In the beginning, he and his team had actually worked without formal approval. He was acting on his own initiative because he knew that Metroid deserved better attention than Nintendo's executives were willing to give it. And sure enough, behind closed doors, Sakamoto and his growing team were constructing a masterpiece. It took about 4 years, but Super Metroid finally released in 1994. Super Metroid did everything the original Metroid had done, but did it bigger, better, and badder in every way. The atmosphere was desolate. The environments were stunning. The power-ups were awesome. The enemies were numberless and occasionally enormous. Gameplay was liquid smooth, and Samus was more acrobatic and agile than ever. In short, while not doing anything dramatically new, it did everything it did the best it had ever been done. Story-wise, Super Metroid picked up right where Metroid 2 had left off. The baby Metroid returned, acting as both the MacGuffin that kicks everything off and the Deus Ex Machina who saves the day in the end. He's kidnapped by the evil space pirates who start cloning him to produce a new army of Metroids. Of course, Samus heads off to wipe out the Metroid menace again. But in yet another epic twist ending, Samus actually loses her battle against the final boss. The player has to watch her hero get killed, until, at the last second, the baby Metroid, now fully grown, returns and defends Samus. He dies in the process. His heroic sacrifice to save the woman who saved him added a touch of emotional weight that video games were only beginning to explore at that time. As a game, it was a masterclass in platforming, in action, in nonlinear design, and in 2D gaming in general. Kenji Yamamoto's score was a symphony of melodious MIDI music. Reviews were glowing, and fans of the series knew that they were playing something truly special. Super Metroid is often cited as one of the finest games of all time. Therefore, it didn't sell well. Wait, what? It was The Curse of Metroid, a fabulous game released at the exact wrong time. The game came out in 1994, the very tail end of the Super Nintendo's life cycle. As such, it never sold like the system's Mario and Zelda titles. The 4 years Sakamoto and his team had spent crafting the game had been well worth it, but had delayed it for too long. In Japan, it was competing with the debuts of the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation, more powerful consoles with better-looking games. It did somewhat better in the West, which was still waiting on the releases of those consoles, but those sales weren't enough. Critical praise and word of mouth couldn't compete with gamers holding out for Nintendo's new console, the 64. But Metroid never went there. Gunpei Yokoi, producer of the Metroid series and mastermind behind the Game Boy, next turned his attentions to something even more radical, the Virtual Boy. Sadly, the system was a catastrophe, and in 1996 he left Nintendo. He died in a car crash only a year later. Without his support, the Metroid franchise was left out in the cold. After all, despite the glowing reviews and dedicated fans, Metroid had simply never sold like Mario. Nintendo turned its attention elsewhere. If a player wanted a new Samus on the Nintendo 64, she'd have to check out Nintendo's all-star fighting game Super Smash Bros., in which the bounty hunter was a playable character. In the meantime, developers outside of Nintendo pounced on the opportunity. Castlevania Symphony of the Night released in 1997, taking the Metroid formula and refining it to perfection. This non-linear, upgrade-centric style of gameplay was forever after labeled Metroidvania or Castleroid. It made Castlevania a mega smash and left Metroid in the dust. Castlevania, releasing early in the PlayStation's life cycle, was at the right place at the right time, where Metroid was always in the wrong place at the wrong time. As the years ticked by with no Metroid in sight, fans resigned themselves to the possibility that their beloved series was destined not to be. It seemed unlikely that there would ever be a Metroid again. It would be really unlikely if Metroid were to be resurrected into one of the greatest games of all time by a nearly failed Western studio, right? Tune in next time to see Metroid resurrected into one of the greatest games of all time by a nearly failed Western studio.